Did you know wood moves? Maybe you've had a project that you thought was perfect and things changed. I know that's happened to me more than once. If you want to know all about wood movement, stick around. All right, welcome back and welcome to the shop. I actually have a small tree right next to me, as you can see. This is a small ash tree. It's a great example of what constitutes or what makes up the properties of wood. So as a tree grows, all of the fibers are running along the length of the actual trunk or the branches and whatnot. And if we were to zoom in, as if it was broom straw, all just compacted and oriented along the length of the tree like this. Now, these fibers that are inside of the tree are transporting the nutrients. They're like wicking moisture, and the sap flows early in the spring and it's just wicked up through these fibers to feed the leaves, and the cycle goes on and on each season. So trees are full of moisture. They're actually roughly 35% moisture content, and it's all in these fibers. So now think of these fibers running the length of the tree. These fibers, when they absorb moisture, they swell. So, but they don't expand along the length, okay? If they do, it's very small, all right? Let's do an experiment, okay? Let's look at this little demo here. I've got some material here. This is actually veneer. I chose veneer because it's thin. It's going to react to moisture much faster to make this illustration. So this is veneer. This was actually sawn out of a walnut tree, and you can see the lines are vertical this way. This is the way the fibers move. So I could crack this easily across. See how it's already splitting right here? That's splitting along those fibers. So they're all running this way, all right? This is with the grain, this is cross grain. Now I've got a piece of white ash, just like this tree here as well, and the grain is running this way. And so we would expect that the movement with moisture added to this will expand it across the grain. So it's as if all these fibers in this little piece of veneer are running this way. So let's check it out. Now, these two pieces I've actually cut exactly square, okay? They were sawn with a nice straight edge. In fact, you can see this is our measuring board, okay? If I put this veneer right against the stop, then my measuring board, you can see how my measuring board is flush with the edge right there, okay? I'm gonna turn it across the grain, again, against the fence. We butt it right up, and we're flush. Let's check the ash piece just to confirm. Same situation. I feel like I'm doing a magic trick. So let's just, so we will check it out this way. All right, this is actually a little wider, slightly wider. Look at, so I don't know why. This must have taken up a little moisture already from the last time I cut it. I should have checked it. But look at it. Let's measure how much it is.
Minuscule.
Well, it's actually a 1/16 of an inch, okay? So it's a 1/16 of an inch wider this way, but it's exactly the same in this direction. So let's just remember that. This one's a 1/16 of an inch wider. Now we're gonna take some water and we're gonna spritz. We're not spraying. What exactly is the difference between a spritz and a spray? There is not a spritz setting on the sprayer. Okay. If anyone knows that, you can chime in. Otherwise, I'm going to be up all night spritzing. All right. So, look, we're letting that soak in. We're just going to let that saturate and see what happens, okay? Okay. I'm going to put that right there. Now, while that's chilling out, let's look at this little thing, how wood is cut into boards. All right, so let's look at this log. I already cut it into some boards on my bandsaw. I should have cleaned this end off better, but I think you can see what's going on. So trees, we know they grow along the length here, but they also grow from the center outward. So if you're familiar, you can see, can you see the rings pretty well there? You're seeing chainsaw marks here, but then you have these growth rings. You see them? Mm-hmm. Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So you've got these growth rings going around here. Each year, another ring is added. Now I'm skipping rings. And I could actually count from the center, the pith, out one at a time and figure out how many years this is. Wow, they're really tight out here. Now, I'm just guesstimating. That's probably 10. This is probably 40, 50 years old, okay? I should have counted before, but you get the idea. So we've got that much growth just on this side, right? Took 40 years to grow that wide. So when you get a tree cut down like this, it goes to the lumber mill and it's sawn into boards. And you'll get your boards cut often in this manner. So they'll be sawing them to get the best yield of the best material. Usually what's in the pith, around the pith, gets cut for thicker, like 4x4s and heavier timbers that way. But you will get some really nice planks outside, and as you get close to the pith, you'll get these beautiful planks. But you can see with each saw board, you've got different orientation of the growth rings are going to occur on that board, okay? So we've got the growth rings out here, and then on this piece, right from here to here, the growth rings are almost perpendicular to the surface. So they're going across like that, and then way down here, they're running parallel or in plane with the surface, especially this little piece. Now, this is a wasted piece, but you can really get the idea here. You can see this is tangential. This line is remember your geometry class? Mm-hmm. Do you remember that, really?
I do. Tangent, yeah.
Okay.
Don't go too much further than that.
How do you say that in French? All right, so it's tangential to the growth rings, and then these are perpendicular. This cut is perpendicular to the growth rings, or it's a radial cut right in here. It's going perpendicular or radially to the growth rings, or out from the center, okay? So we'll revisit that in a second, but let's check and see what's happened to our experiment. All right, so this is starting to dry a little, you can see right there. Let's check it. This is our one that was a 1/16 longer, the ash piece. I'm going to butt it up against there and look at this end. We're virtually flush right there because this is the lengthwise. We didn't expect much change, did we? Now let's turn it. We'll butt up again. Oh my gosh, look at that. We're against the fence, and we're literally a little over a half an inch. This moved almost a half an inch.
That's crazy.
Now that's saturating it, right? So you can see we had all the movement across the grain. These fibers are just swelling this way, but no movement lengthwise. Okay, let's look at one more. Here's our beautiful piece of walnut. Wow, it looks nice, right? We'll check that against the fence. And again, Virtually no movement. It actually does move a tiny bit. See, you can see it sticking out just a tiny bit, right? But we added a lot of water. We're really, comparatively to how thin this is, it's really saturated. Now we'll check it across the grain. Wow, look at that. 3/8 of an inch wider with that saturation. So this is a magnified example of what's happening to wood all the time. So when we build with it, we want to be careful that we build in such a way that we have stable boards. Now let's look at another illustration of the tree, just to get our terminology down a little bit here. So here's an end section, a lot like what we just looked at with the ash tree. So we've got, this is just a larger looking tree, but I've drawn boards or where they might be cut and taken from this tree. So up here, let's just make a blue line here where this was originally here, okay? And we've got, if we sawed a flat piece out of there, or let's do one down here where it's not confusing. Okay, we would saw what's a board right across this nice grain here, and we would end up with the growth rings running tangentially across the piece or flat to the face of the board. So this type of board is called flat sawn or plain sawn lumber. Then you have this type of board that you'll get where the grain is actually diagonal-ish. So it could be like, in general, they consider it like 30 degrees to 60 degrees to the surface where you're getting lines running across. And that's referred to as rift sawn. And then you have this type of grain where it's 0 to 30-ish, where the growth rings are perpendicular to the piece. So you have this radial cut, and now the growth rings are running just a little short across, and this is called quarter sawn. So you'll get this very linear growth on the face. Let's look at it in some actual boards. So we've got, here's an end grain of an actual piece of wood. So we've got a piece of pine here, and you can see the growth rings are flat to the surface or tangential. So this is called a plain sawn or flat sawn wood. So we've got it running right across. And look, you get that flat kind of cut right across the band. So you get this wide kind of arcing cathedral figure on the face. You've all seen that. But that's when it's cut oriented in tangential way. And now we have this board. I don't know, you can see the growth rings really. Let's turn it this way. So this almost corresponds exactly to this one. So you can see the rings here, and then look how they come down, and they're almost 90 degrees right here. So this is quarter sawn. When you look at the face of this, you can see the grain. This is very light grain on this white pine, but it's very linear on the face. You're not getting that cathedral figure because you're cutting right across. Now I wanted to talk about that because we know already that wood is going to move this way across the board, but not so much in the length. But the orientation to the growth rings affects how much it moves. So when you're running across or tangential to the growth rings or plain sawn, it moves more than it does when it's quarter sawn. The reason is that all of the movement, or primarily, is going along the length of the growth rings, okay? So imagine, if you will, those growth rings are like rubber bands. As it loses moisture, those rubber bands are gonna contract and they're gonna pull up. That's why when a board is rough sawn, then it dries, it gets dried down, it actually will pull along those growth rings. So it's going to shrink along them. And this board would actually deform opposite the curve. It would pull, and it would pull this edge up, and it would pull this edge up, and you get this kind of cupping, which I drew up here, okay? So it's moving a lot along the rings. However, on this quarter sawn piece, the growth rings are running almost perpendicular. So most of the movement is happening across the growth rings again. In fact, it's moving so much across there that when this board is sawn out, it rarely goes out of flat. It'll go out very little because those growth rings are now perpendicular and they're not pulling it out of shape. But the other thing is, when this board expands and contracts seasonally with moisture, it moves half as much as a plain sawn board. And just to give you some of the figures on that, let's turn it around. Look at that. This is some of the actual ratios or measurements that have been taken on materials. So let's just take a species like ash, which we already looked at. It's got a factor of 27 thousandths. I forget exactly what that refers to. I'm pretty sure it's how much it moves per inch per percent moisture. It's not important that we know exactly that, but just notice the difference. On a flat sawn piece, it's moving 27 thousandths. On a quarter sawn piece, it's moving 17. Is that thousandths or whatever? It's moving, just look at the ratio here. All right, it's 33 to 23.
10 thousandths.
43, yeah, 10 thousandths. 17 10 thousandths. So 43 10 thousandths to 19 in beech. So you can see the quarter sawn is less than half in that piece. Now, as we look at oak, let's look at the white oak. Again, we have 37 to 18, so that's almost exactly. But what does this mean in terms of real boards? So down here, I actually did the calculation using the formula that we could get into the weeds with some other time. But we've got white oak, a 12-inch wide board with a 6% moisture change will move 0.129 or an eighth of an inch. Now this is the quarter sawn, okay? So, but that's a lot of moisture change, 6%. So an eighth of an inch over 12-inch piece seasonally. However, on the flat sawn, it's going to move about a quarter inch using these calculations. And then we did the same with other species here. Now, what's really a little surprising, what's kind of cool to see is that a wood like Eastern white pine, look at the numbers here. Quarter sawn is 7 10,000ths that factor, and flat sawn is 21. So on white pine, a 12-inch wide board at a 6% moisture change is only moving 3/64ths of an inch on the quarter sawn and 5/32 on the flat sawn. So that's negligible, and we're not getting that much of a swing in our homes, like that much moisture change typically. But that is a great way of actually showing you that white pine is the most stable material in our country. So anyway, I just have always thought that's interesting, that here's a piece of white pine. This is quarter sawn white pine. So when this is dry, it is the most stable of species in North America. Isn't that cool? And it's light. Now, let's talk a little bit about buying wood and buying it dry. Because when you're not going to go out and cut your own trees, probably not like this, but you'll buy it already in the board form, more than likely. And if you do, that wood has been kiln dried. It's been taken, if it's done well, it's taken slowly down to a lower moisture content. So just think of if it's 35%, like I said earlier, moisture content, you want to get it down to 8 about 6 to 10% or 8, around there is ideal for woodworking. Right around 6 to 8% is what it's typically kiln dried down to. Okay. Now, if that wood is then brought home and it's left outside, it's going to start taking on the relative humidity outside. Okay, so you want to take it into an air-controlled environment, otherwise it's not going to be as stable. So most homes are going to be around that range too. So when you turn on your heat in the winter, your house tends to dry more and you're going to have the boards are going to be shrinking to their narrowest extent. In the summertime, you get the humidity, which tends to swell the materials. That's why you may have noticed in your home doors sticking in the summer, but closing easily in the winter. Certain doors will do that. So that's not a problem when you're buying kiln dried wood. And that's primarily what I do by myself. I have cut my own trees like this here and air dried it, but it's a little tricky. So when you air dry, you're doing it outside typically. So the nice thing is that it's a slow process and you don't have any of the problems that you can encounter with kiln dried wood. If it's dried too fast, you can get what's called case hardening, where the outside is hard and the inside it actually has like honeycomb fractures. And if you've ever cut a board where it's split like violently, almost apart, it was not dried properly. It is stresses in the wood, but more than often than not, that's an issue with it being dried too rapidly. But when you dry it yourself, it's a slow process. In fact, the average is usually thought to be 1 inch per year. If you put some sticks between it and you let the air move through it, it's going to dry down. Now, when it stabilizes, it's going to be at the relative humidity of that environment, okay? So the relative humidity outside is, well, the moisture content it'll bring it down to is probably going to be about 12 to 15% even, depending where you live. If you live in the humid, like south, it's going to be around, higher end of that, all right? But if you live in the Northeast or a dry climate like the Southwest, you'll be pretty close to 10% or less. I'm not that familiar with how dry it gets there, but I know it's pretty dry. So it'd be a good place to air dry your lumber in like Arizona, something.
So do hardwood dealers sell air dried? And if so, how can you tell?
Rarely do they, because it takes too long. Usually wood, when it's cut, if you are in a drying at a lumber dryer, they'll be milling it and they'll let it stabilize a little bit before it goes into the kiln to get rid of some of the initial moisture. But no, they don't have time. They've got to turn it over. So they're trying to kiln dry it and move it and keep the cash flow going. They're not going to have like piles of lumber. There are places though that do that. So it's just a different situation where you're going to have more inventory. But primarily they're using kilns. There's vacuum kilns, there's solar kilns, there's the regular standard kilns that all have their place. Yeah.
Where is, Peter's curious where mahogany is on that list. Do you know?
Oh, I didn't put it in there. But mahogany is one of the more stable woods. That's why it was so nice to use in the 18th century. And yeah, because we don't use it that much. I'm talking genuine mahogany. I'm not sure about the African, but I have compared it. But you can see like white oak and maple, they move a lot. They're up in the 35, 37 here, where poplar's down, 29, a little less. So, and walnut's a little more stable. But then, so those hardwoods like maple and oak, you got to watch out for them and make sure they're dry in that situation. Now, one of the questions, maybe it was Tim who suggested the question, said, what do you do if you're working in a workshop that doesn't have heat and air conditioning, no control of the humidity in the room? Well, that's going to be tough because you have no ability to get that wood to what it's more than likely going to be subjected to in a home. In a home, you're going to have the heat, you're going to have the air conditioning. So you're going to have to plan for more wood movement if you're building in a shop that's not heated. So especially if you're drying your own lumber, it's only going to get down so much. Now, one of the good things, this doesn't mean you can't air dry your lumber. In fact, I've done it many times, but what I recommend and what I learned from Pug Moore and when I apprenticed in North Carolina was he had sometimes they would get trees off the property. He had some beautiful walnut pieces, boards, and when he was closing his shop, we went through like a trap door up in the attic. I didn't even realize there was a little attic in the shop, but it was just a small roof. And we got a step ladder and went up there and we pulled down some beautiful walnut boards that were stashed up there because he had air dried them outside. Then he stuck them up in the hot attic to close it down and to just wring out that last bit of moisture in the attic. That heat really cooked them and stabilized them. And he had shown me pieces he had made out of other material. And do you know, this walnut chest of drawers right here, the sides and the top are made from those boards because he gave them to me. And that was when we were closing up the shop. I don't remember if it was the front as much, but the sides, let me turn it right here so you can see. Look how beautiful that is. There's just one seam here. That's beautiful plain sawn walnut from North Carolina, air dried and actually finished in Pug Moore's shop attic. And the top is just so gorgeous and nice. Love this piece. And I saved this. I wouldn't sell this chest for that reason because of the, I don't know, can you see those boards up there? Probably a lot of reflection. So anyway, that is all to say, if you're going to dry it yourself and you have access to a hot place like an attic, go ahead and stick it up there and then bring it down when you can to use it. So there's two terms to this. Moisture content in the wood, which I said, about 6 to 10%, 6 to 8% is what you typically get kiln dried. But I'm also using the term relative humidity. So the relative humidity is a different term. The moisture content is measuring the weight of the water in the wood. Okay, so if the wood was bone dry, you'd have 0% moisture content. But when you're at 8% of the weight of that wood is water. Okay, so that's the moisture content. Relative humidity is the water in the air. Okay, this is a measurement. But you can think of it this way. If you live in a place that has a relative humidity of about 35 to 40, that's going to dry your boards down to about 12 to 15%, okay? Depends where you live. So it's roughly equivalent to that, but that's why having a moisture meter, if you're going to dry your own material, is worth investing in. I've had one, but I don't even own one anymore because I use kiln dried wood, and I also have grown so sensitive that I just pick it up and I go, yeah, that's all right. Actually, no, I haven't.
We believe you.
Yeah. So I want to show you some examples of how to build, thinking about what we've talked about here, this wood movement. We've always got to consider it. Just a little quick example of making composite material. So plywood. Plywood is made up of multiplies of wood. Stating the obvious. So I've got some 16th inch layers of poplar right here. So the way plywood is made is if I just glued up some pieces and had them all oriented the same way, the glue would restrict somewhat the movement, but not a lot, right? It would still want to move, but it'd be restricted slightly by the glue. However, if every layer I turn the grain, so this, let's say this was my center board, and then I turned the next one like this, and then I put one on the other side, that direction, then the next two layers are going to flip, and they'll go the opposite direction. So now I have the fibers in the wood are resisting the movement of the other layer. So all plywoods are an odd number like that. It starts with the interior, and then it goes outward with the other two flipping always to try to counterbalance. So here's a piece of plywood right here, and you can see that. Now, most plywoods, the maximum they'll go is like 1/8 of an inch. So I've got 1/8 of an inch in the middle there, and then every other layer I'm looking at end grain or side grain. So to be, let's see, this center piece is end grain you're looking at, and then you got side grain, then end grain. And then you have the outer skins to put on the final veneer pieces. So we played around and made our own little map of burl veneer on the top there. Now the beauty of a composite type plywood like this is when you laminate it up like this in a press, you've created a very stable board. So if you want to not worry about it expanding, contracting, you can make your own plywood, or you can just use plywood and veneer it with whatever you want. That's why plywood is used so much for cabinets and panels, because you couldn't have all the amount of movement. You want to contain it, control it in certain situations. So plywood, real wood plywood, has exceptional stability dimensionally. So it doesn't stay quite as flat as like MDF, but it's pretty darn flat. So plywood is a great material for controlling movement. Now, when you don't have that luxury, when you're going to build out of solid wood, like they did in the 18th century, like a chest of drawers like this is all solid wood. So these sides, these boards, they're actually 3/4 of an inch thick, and they're all running this way. So I've got a wide board on the side here. When I glue it up, I'm almost 19 inches in depth here. Probably start at 18 3/4. Maybe I'm a 1/16 more. So it's measuring a 1/16 over 18 3/4. I'm guessing I started out at 18 3/4, and now it's a 1/16 more this way. Because as we know, it's expanding across the grain, but not in the length. So same with the drawer fronts. These are solid drawer fronts. They're expanding with the grain across the grain, but not in the length. That's why I don't worry about this sticking side to side. I fit those very close. Look at, I'm pushing side to side, and I'm getting almost no movement. But up and down, I have a tiny bit of movement there. I have to allow for that because if it gets really humid, this drawer is going to expand this way, and it could stick in the opening. But I don't have that problem because I left a little bit of room. Now look at this, the bottom drawer, same thing. But here's the thing, you really don't have to worry as much as you think. Now note this bottom drawer. This is my widest drawer. I'm most concerned about how much this is going to move because this will move the most of all. But if you look at the grain I chose here, I've got a little flat sawn grain here, but then as when you come up here, you're starting to see all the linear grain. So we've got our rift, now we're into the quarter sawn. So this is not moving, it's moving probably half as much on this side as over here. And it was dry and it was relatively stable. And look at this. I added this piece, this caulk beading along perpendicular to the grain. So the grain of this bead, you look at it, it's inlaid in the drawer, cross grain. So this is moving and this little bead is not. But look at, the corners are tight. This would be the time of year, because it's late summer, that we do have a little humidity. It should be opening up there if it was going to at all, but it's not. So it's relatively stable. This is about an 8, just a little over an 8-inch wide drawer. So you can see from your formula there how much it's going to move. I found this great tool online recently, but it's called the Wood Movement Calculator.
Yeah, we'll look it up.
And when you go in there, it'll do this math for you. All you have to do is say how wide is the board, what type of wood it is, what time of year it is, and what the moisture content. I don't even think you have to put in the moisture content. It will then do the calculations of how much you can expect that board to move in a year. So anyway, this is fine. Now, another aspect that you have to think about when building a chest of drawers out of solid wood like this is you want, when you push the drawer in, you want it to hit and stop so that the drawer front is flush and it's right where you want it to be. So this bead is sticking out just the right amount all along the piece, right? So in order to do that, you're going to put some stops in here. And look at, here they are. They're right up front here. This is very classic, typical stops you'd find in an 18th century chest of drawers. They're going to be right there in the front. Or you might have an overlap bead drawer front. In that case, you don't need any stops at all because the overlap bead is stopping the drawer. But here they are. So if I didn't have an overlap bead, I need to put the stops somewhere, but because I've got this solid side that's expanding and contracting, I couldn't put them at the back. Otherwise, when this side expanded, the drawer would go in and it would hit the stop and it would be too far back. Because it's not, the wood on the side of the drawer is not changing length. So if that side expanded a lot and I had the stop in the back, I would put the drawer in and it would go in too far. And if in the winter, in the winter when it got really dry, that side would shrink up, it would hit the stop and it might be too far out front. Okay, because it's not changing on the side, but the side is. That way, when we put our stops up front, we're registering right off this front edge, basically, like 3/4 of an inch back. So we're always going to have the right registration there. And that's also an issue, as you might expect. Look at this solid drawer bottom. That's expanding and contracting in the opposite direction of the sides. So when you have a solid drawer bottom, we make accommodation for that by cutting a little slot in the back of the drawer bottom. And I have a washer head screw. So we secure the tongue in the front, and then it's all the expansion and contraction goes out the back. And we have a little space in the back so it doesn't hit the back of the drawer. I remember once we did an exhibit at a historic house in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and it backed up right to the water. And I thought, oh my gosh, I had a highboy, chest on chest of drawers, mahogany, and the drawer bottoms were all popular like this, and it was on the water. And of course, the room that they put the thing in, I mean, you literally could jump out the window and go in this inlet coming in from the ocean. And so it got really moist in that room. I came back after, for the show after we installed it. And, everybody's having, wine and cheese and all this fun stuff. And I go over to my chest and the drawer one of the drawers is sticking out like that. I'm like, what's going on? And I knew I had put my stops up front. It turned out the drawer bottom had swelled so much that it was bumping the back of the case before it would even hit the stop. And I had to come back with a block plane and just shave them off. So you run into that kind of thing. And the last thing I want to show you is this little game table. So we've got, this was our most recent piece we made in our courses. You can make this piece if you want to check out the courses on Epic Woodworking. And we've got a splayed leg table and this nice little profile drawer. And then look at that. We've got beautiful pine, white pine sides, so we're really stable there. Again, we've got a white pine bottom with the same slot. So we've got a nice stable kind of drawer bottom, mostly quarter sawn, see that? Mostly linear, so that's not moving a lot, even though it's a pretty deep drawer. But here's the thing, the grain on the sides is running along the length here. When we put it in the opening, look, I don't have my stops in the front. I actually put them in the back. Look, we've got a piece of leather on there. So this drawer hits and it stops right in the back. Now what's going to happen? Is that going to mess up how I set the drawer front seasonally? What do you think? Look at the side. The grain on the side is running along the length, the same orientation as our drawer side. So this is not changing, neither is our drawer side. So it really doesn't matter. You can put your stops in the back on a table like this. So there you have it, a crash course.
I have some
in
good
wood movement.
questions for you.
Sure, let's take them.
Dan's asking, if you store boards in an attic, do you need to sticker them to keep them from warping?
I do, Dan. I stick them up there and I put sticks between them. I actually picked up some planks, some wide walnut planks from Philadelphia with my son when he was, I think he was 13 or 14. And it's his birthday today. He just turned 31. Can you believe that? Mm-hmm. So those boards have been up in my attic since I got back from that trip because they were wet. They were not as dry as I had hoped. But I just made that game table out of those boards. So I actually cut the legs and it was beautiful air dried, material there. But I knew I was up in the attic is so much lighter, very stable. Yeah, you should put sticks around it.
Okay, David's asking, what is the least moisture content you want to work with? I know you were claiming some numbers and percentages, but personally?
It depends, you're almost running into the same issue, but from the other direction. Usually we're almost always working with wood that might be too high in moisture content. So when you bring it into an environment, it's going to shrink and crack possibly, or warp weirdly if it's not down to that 8%-ish. But if you have wood that's super dry, I would just treat it the same way. You're going to bring it into your shop and let it acclimate. You might live in a super dry location. So maybe you're in the Southwest and maybe in all the homes it's really dry. But in your shop, you're probably going to have some kind of counter for that.
So there's a percentage that you wouldn't go below what you're saying?
No, I mean, how low can you get? Yeah. You're going to always adjust. So, 6 to 8% is ideal, right? And so you're not going to ever get too much lower than that.
Okay, Steve's asking, any recommendation as to how long one should wait after rough cutting your hardwood before building your project?
Oh, that's a good question, Steve. If you've had it outside for a while, I would wait a little bit. But when I buy it kiln dried, I'll bring it home, get it in the shop, and make sure I lean my material up against the wall, typically. And when I lay the boards up there, I usually scoot the base out a little so they always have a little air if I do stack them up against each other. so that they're starting to rebalance to that environment inside, right? Because it was kiln dried, it's probably pretty close to being used right away. But if you're going to use it for like big planks for like the sides, you want to make sure that you kind of sneak up on the dimension. So I would have them inside for, I usually try to get them in at least a week before I'm building the project. And then once you start dressing the material, you're going to flatten it. I would joint one face and then I run it through the thickness planer. But if I was going down to say 3/4 of an inch board and I want it to be flat, I would stop. I would kind of staircase it. So I wouldn't go immediately to 3/4. Even though I gave it some time in the shop, I would go down to like 7/8 and then stand it up and let it chill again. So not only is the moisture kind of balancing, but the board, you've taken material off both sides, so it's restabilizing. You might have changed the tension in the fibers to one another. So it needs to just kind of chill and stabilize. And then once, I'll usually go a day or two, let it chill out at least further. And a lot of times you'll come back in the morning or a couple days later and look across and you're seeing a little cup. In that case, you still got like a good 1/8 of an inch. So then I skin one face. I just put the cup side down on the joiner, skin that flat, and then I'll bring it down to flat that way. So that's typically the way I'll sneak up on it.
Okay. Abu says the bottom of the bottom drawer, does it have hardwood runner added?
Oh yeah. Yeah, Boo. That was a little thing we did. Those I added later on that. That's poplar. Because that's a chest of drawers where it's going to get a lot of clothing in it. So you're going to have heavier drawer movement there. The poplar is also heavier than the white pine. So that lower drawer, it has some weight to it. So bringing that in and out, if it's used frequently, you wear those sides. So what we did was laminated a strip of hard maple on the bottom. And we have hard maple or oak runners inside the case. So that's going to wear very well. It'll take a long time. Usually I like laminating that maple on white pine drawer sides because if we go back, the white pine is the most stable material. So it stays, if we got 1/4 sawn white pine, use that for your drawer sides and back and laminate that strip of maple on the bottom edge and you have the ultimate drawer sides for good long use.
Okay, Charlie is asking, how can you remedy a board that has cupped despite doing everything correctly?
Well, you really can't. I don't know. We used to have a little trick that we use at Pugs. And, if that happened on a wide plank and you wanted it to flatten out a bit, you'd take it in the morning, you get there, and say around 8, 9 o'clock, whatever, you'd bring that plank out and lay it cup side down on the dewy grass, right? So that moisture in the grass starts hitting that side and the sunlight is hitting the other side. And what happens is it goes right back to flat. And if you forget about it, you'll go out and it's going to be the opposite way. But it is going to come back again. Now the good news is that if you get it close, lots of times in practicality, when you're using it on a project, those boards are reinforced by other elements of the construction of that piece. Okay, so like in the case of this chest of drawers, those sides get dovetailed into a top and bottom end, which once those are dovetailed, if I had a slight curvature, when I glued that up in there, that's going to pull it a little, and it does, it brings it back. And then you're attaching all of the interior runners inside here, and those get screwed to the side, and those are like cleats all up along here. So in that case, you're getting some stabilizing flatness. The top, if I had a little bit out there, though it's actually screwed on, when I run the screws in there, it pulls it down, you'll have a little flexing. On dining tabletops, same thing. Usually you're going to have these longer cleats to attach to the underside of the top, and that's going to flatten and pull out that subtle curve. If you have a really bad one, I don't know, sometimes you have to rip the board, and I've done this numerous times. You just have to rip it. If it's got too much of a cup and you can't work with it, just find a good line that you can rip, so when you glue it back, it will be not very noticeable. When you rip the board, you'll then flatten each piece individually and then glue it up again, being very careful to have it flat. And that way you can lose the least amount of material, especially if it's a wide plank.
Does wood finish affect wood movement?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it slows down the exchange of moisture, but it doesn't eliminate it. So wood, I mean, water always wins, you know? I mean, even your house doors, you can paint them, paint the end grain and the face grain, and that is inhibiting, it's slowing down the exchange of moisture. So it does resist, but it doesn't eliminate it. It's still going to happen, but it does help.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess I do have two more questions, sorry.
Okay.
David's asking, would frame and panel sides on a chest of drawers be a completely different build with wood movement?
Who is that?
David.
Dave, yeah. That's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up, because the whole point of frame and panel on the side of a chest of drawers, yeah, it changes the way you think about a chest of drawers. Now you've created a side that does not move as much. In fact, that's the whole reason for frame and panel doors, and all of your doors in your house are frame and panel basically, because if you think about it, just the stiles, the vertical sides are expanding and contracting, okay? The cross pieces are not. So then you have your panels that are inset. Those are expanding and contracting too, but they're given movement or place to move. So those are kind of floating in this place, but the sides are more stable. In fact, one of the secret methods of door builders is actually they laminate the stiles, the vertical pieces, and then they veneer them outside with like 1/8" material. So they have like a solid wood core. So they end up with a more stable style, but also it stays flat and true a lot better than a solid board. So when you're dealing with some of these really nice, beautiful, expensive doors, those styles may not be solid. They may be laminated, which, you know, with boards up on edge that way. So, all right, wow. You guys were into that more than I thought, but I'm into it too. And it's something I've thought about a lot. I've had projects ruined, learned the hard way, but I'm happy to share that with you. And thanks for being part of this. This is a lot of fun. Once we understand the material, we can feel more freedom to work with it in beautiful, creative ways. So thank you once again for hanging out with us, sharing our lives here, our creative lives, and thank you on behalf of the camera lady. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thank you.
And myself. We look forward to seeing you next time, right back here on Shop Night Live. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Thank you so much for hanging out.